Good evening, everybody. We're ready to get our program started. We are ready to get our program started. Hey, Art. We're ready to get started. Well, I want to welcome everybody here to the Heartland Institute for another fantastic event on a beautiful day. I'm so sick of rain. My yard is sick of rain. Our pets are sick of rain, and I know we're all sick of rain, so it's so great to see a beautiful day today and to see all of you take time out of this beautiful day to be here with us tonight in another packed house for this event tonight with Steve Moore, which is sold out, which is great. I have a little bit of news to impart. Rumors may have been going around that Steve Moore's plane was late and that he is going to be late. I have to say about those rumors, they're 100% true. He's a Chicago boy and he should know better. He landed at Midway, for crying out loud, out of Washington, D.C. I know, right? Be sure to give him hell for that when he gets here. Because we're here in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, and landing in Midway, you might as well land in Milwaukee. But I've been told that his plane has landed, although it was late getting out of D.C. His Uber driver is the husband of our events director, Nikki Comerford, and I'm getting constant updates on my phone of when he will be here. And he will be here before the sun goes down, but he will be here in time to actually make sure we have a continued program. And our Master of Ceremonies for tonight with AM 560 is the great Dan Proft of the morning show there on AM 560. Let's hear a round of applause for Dan Proft. Hopefully Dan can hear that on the 53 because that's where it is right now. There's an accident on 53 and he's having a little trouble getting here. So I had a couple options to keep you entertained this evening until Dan gets here. One of them was I was going to do shadow puppets. But I haven't done that since my nephew was 10 and I had entertained a room of 10-year-olds. So instead, I am going to maybe give a little extended spiel about Heartland. I know a lot of you here are regulars, and it's so great to see you here. You're longtime supporters of Heartland, and that's great. But I know there's a lot of new people here as well. And so, again, for the new people, my name is Jim Lakely. I am the Director of Communications here at Heartland, and I want to thank again AM 560, The Answer, for being such a wonderful partner with us for our events this spring. This is, I think, your third or fourth event that you've been here with the display table. Yeah, we love you guys too. We've worked with, let's hear a round of applause for the great AM 560, The Answer. We've partnered with them on many projects over the years, and it's great and events like this, and it's great to have them here with us. So if you have not visited their table, if you're in need of a bottle opener or a magnet, and also to get on an email list with a lot of great information, please visit the table here with AM 560, and they can talk to you about that. One of the projects that the Heartland Institute has been doing, of course, we're known globally for, you see these on your tables, there's postcards here for Save the Date. July 25th in Washington, D.C. is Heartland's 13th International Conference on Climate Change. This is the conference on climate change that the eco-left wishes never happened. The media pretends doesn't happen sometimes, but the world knows that this is important. We actually just announced this just a few weeks ago. I'm getting lots of media attention for this. We're having this in D.C. I'm having them email me personally and ask me permission to cover it. The Guardian, the leftist newspaper, wants to be there. I'll probably say yes. Vice News on HBO, another leftist outfit, wants to have cameras there. We'll see if they're going to be there. But this is a great event. If you want to go to D.C. this summer, and who doesn't want to be in the swamp in the middle of summer, this is a great event. If you have not been to one of Heartland's climate conferences, these are really the biggest international conference on climate change. This brings climate scientists from around the world who do not buy in to the myth, really, that human activity is causing a climate crisis, that we are destroying the earth. Or as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, we got 12 years and then we're all going to die. That stuff ain't true. And it's not true because science says it's not true. So if you want to come to D.C., please come to this event. You can find the information for this on heartland.org. And if you cannot make it, we'll be live streaming it from there too. It'll be easy to find, and you should check that out as well. But another project that we've been working on lately, last 6 months or so, is on socialism, specifically stopping socialism. That is the name of our program. The guy who heads it up for us is a millennial named Justin Haskins. He's the executive editor here at the Heartland Institute. He's a fantastic writer and thinker. He has a new book out called Socialism is Evil. I love that title because it gets right to the darn point. And he's been getting a lot of media attention lately for this project, and it's been great to have Heartland supporting that so that we get attention too. And instead of explaining a little bit more, I'm going to have Andy Singer, running our AV hub back there, to play a little video to kind of give you a sense of what our project is about and the kind of attention and the expression of this is going on.
You're pretty clear on socialism. You were very clear and very funny about the Green New Deal on how this is clearly just socialism. It has nothing to do with green energy or anything else.
Correct. Yeah. The Green New Deal is the most radical, dangerous, destructive policy proposal in modern American history. It is a socialist Trojan horse without any question at all.
And just the idea that these Democrat politicians, every major Democrat political candidate for president is talking about implementing socialism in this country through the Green New Deal. It's tragic, and it would be a massive failure in this country as well.
We have to explain to them why socialism is so dangerous, how it's killed, murdered, exiled, or imprisoned 167 million people over the past 100 years. We have to explain to them why it's dangerous so that we don't end up with socialism. I believe we're going to win that war, but it's a war that we need to fight, and right now we're in the midst of it.
Just because the UN and Al Gore 30 years ago claimed the world would end long before now, right. She's using that as a launch pad to promote socialism through America. But I'm not surprised that the whole Democrat Party has taken this on. I mean, Bernie Sanders literally won the primary in 2016. Yeah. It was stolen from him by the elites, but now every major Democrat candidate that I know is signing on to socialism.
Yeah, every single job in the oil and gas industry, every fracking job, all of them would go away, all to accomplish this pie-in-the-sky goal of eliminating climate change in 80 years. This is actually not about green energy. It would be impossible to switch the entire electricity generation system in the United States over to renewable energy in just 12 years. And I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders and people like that know that. This is really about socialism. This is nothing more than a socialist Trojan horse.
But to think people in America, in our U.S. Senate and U.S. House, are saying we'd be better off if we're in Venezuela. We'd be better off under a socialist system. We're here to say no. Freedom is always a better solution than government.
You don't owe the government anything. Your money is your money. Your wealth is your wealth. Your property belongs to you. Do we want to be remembered as the generation that destroyed America? Is that who we want to be? And this is our moment. Every generation has had to face it. This is our Revolutionary War. It's our War of 1812. This is our beaches of Normandy. There's no one shooting at us, but the war is real. We have to decide, who the hell are we? We have an opportunity to save America, or we have an opportunity to destroy it. I hope we don't destroy it. Let's not screw it up.
That he's been doing on socialism. We made that video, I don't know, Andy, when did we make that? About a month ago, maybe month and a half ago, and he's done another dozen media hits on television since then. So this is a great project that Heartland started. We actually started before the 2018 election, and it ended up being very timely because suddenly socialism is in vogue, especially among millennials, and Justin's job is to carry the banner of freedom and to educate, especially young people, about socialism. I have a question. Has anyone heard of or is watching the HBO show Chernobyl that's on TV? One person? Thanks, Mark. Oh, people in the back on staff. So HBO, they have a new miniseries out titled Chernobyl, and it's a 5-part miniseries. It's about the meltdown or the accident at the Chernobyl power plant. And so you've been there, yes, Carl, you have. And so, and you're still here today, which is fun, which is fantastic. So, so I was listening to a podcast, and there was these millennials on a podcast, and it's a pop culture podcast. They're talking about, they talked about Game of Thrones before, and they talk about a bunch of stuff, and they were watching Chernobyl. So I thought, this is interesting. I wonder what somebody who was born, in 1986 or slightly before the Chernobyl accident, or maybe even after, what do they think about all this? Because when I'm watching it, we're 3 episodes in, and to me, it is a great example. Of course, it's a disaster film. In a lot of respects, it's kind of a mystery because they're slowly unveiling or revealing what it was that caused the accident. But to me, it's also a great anti-Soviet Union propaganda film because these guys are, they're all pointing fingers. Somebody else is accountable. Send him to the gulag, not me. It was that guy, not me. Nobody wants to take any accountability. And all the decisions they make by committee, there's actually a really funny phone call where the guy says, you've been on a special committee to examine Chernobyl, and it's been picked by 7 other committees, and then now you are on this committee too. It's like, how do you run a country like this? And so, but these 2 millennials were talking about it, and they actually said that this would be the same way in the United States. That just like the Soviet committees and the party are all sloughing off responsibility for who did this, that would be the same thing in the United States. So these are millennials who were taught, obviously they didn't just come up with this, they were taught this all through their lives. That there really is no moral or even structural or competency difference between the Soviet Union of the 1980s and the United States today. There's a striking scene in the first episode where there's this old gentleman, so they're trying to get their heads around what happened, and they really don't even know. And there's an older gentleman in the back of the room sitting down with a cane, and he starts tapping his cane, and everybody is quiet. So this is 1986. The guy would be in about his late 70s or 80s. So he was a child of the Bolshevik Revolution. So he has a perspective that all of these people in their 40s trying to clean this up don't have. And he stands up and he says, remember, what is the name of this power plant? It's the Lenin nuclear power plant. Lenin was a great man. The revolution was great. Remember, the party and the state supports you and will handle this and is competent and loves you. Remember that always, comrades. And then he gets a standing ovation from people. So here was a true believer who came up in the revolution who actually believes that the state was going to fix all this, was going to clean it up, and take care of everybody. And then he says, now close off the city and cut all the phone lines so that no misinformation gets out. And 2 millennials I listened to on a podcast, watching that scene, said, it'd probably be the same thing with some city council member doing that and saying, we can handle it. Everything's going to be all right. If 2 people in their 30s think that the same thing would happen in Lake Zurich or in Trier or any municipality in this country as exactly what happened in the Soviet Union in 1986, there is a big, big problem in this country. I know it's just pop culture. I know it probably doesn't mean anything. But I listened to that on the way into work today, and I was quite upset. And that is the reason why the Heartland Institute started our Stopping Socialism program, because there is a obvious lack of education by people who don't know. I was a kid of the Cold War. I knew this stuff. I was 15 when Chernobyl happened. I saw Ronald Reagan's presidency and enjoyed it as a teenager. Kids today, they don't see that. They have no idea that the Soviet Union was not just an economic failure, but a moral failure, and that freedom in the United States is infinitely better than the Soviet Union. So, Robert, we'll get a question in a minute, but go ahead, ask your question real quick. I want to bring up Dan Proft because he's a lot better talker than me.
What I just wanted to say that one of the capitalism is facing a crisis today because of misbehaviors by some of our corporate leaders. Bezos, the richest man in the world, he's sending these naked pictures of himself to his girlfriend, and there's cheating in Harvard Business School, Stanford. We don't have the character and the moral character that we had before. I used to work for the 2 guys who started Target. The purpose of business is to serve society. Profit is the way we make money, through service and with integrity. And we're sponsoring a group that I've been chairing in the past, is sponsoring a conference with the CEOs of Cargill, of Best Buy, of Ecolabs and others to talk about moral capitalism, the foundation of capitalism, the way it ought to operate. We have a set of business principles that are the most widely circulated in the world. We have to showcase this, and so the millennials will see proper capital, moral capitalism, instead of the stuff that Bezos, who doesn't give much money away, and so on. I said too much, but it's important. Thank you.
That's very good. Very good. Round of applause for Bob. So that's just all of a way to fill some time. But also, I think it really struck me as really important that the work that the Heartland Institute does is important. I know a lot of people in this room support us and what we do in our mission. And there's nothing more important, I think, than educating the generations coming up what freedom is, what capitalism is, and how it is the best moral choice and the best ordering of society that has ever been invented. And if you give up on freedom, if you give up on liberty with all of its problems, because if you allow someone to do what they want, that could be a problem because you're not thinking about it right. If you think about freedom for everybody, that should be fine enough for you. With that, we are actually quite fortunate to a certain extent that Steve Moore is going to be late, because one thing I was very happy that Dan Proft of the great and mighty AM 560 was going to be our MC tonight. And I was wondering, Steve Moore talks a lot. When is Dan going to get his time? Well, guess what? Now is Dan's time. He's going to be here to speak whatever he wants, and I'm sure he's going to open up to questions. Let's please welcome our MC for tonight, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Thank you, Jim. It's always great to be back at the Heartland Institute. This really is a gem in the Midwest to have a think tank of the caliber of Heartland Institute for the past 3 decades plus that is promoting free minds and free markets here in Chicago, of all places. I agree with the gentleman that there is no bigger indictment of capitalism than naked pictures of Jeff Bezos. It's a difficult position to defend. There's no question. So that's not what we want capitalism to represent. Oh, can you hear me? All right, sorry. So it's interesting that Jim was talking about Chernobyl and the HBO series, which I'm watching as well. I was actually in the Baltic states in 1992, 3 years after the wall fell, and one of the places we went to in Lithuania, just outside Vilnius, in '92. And by the way, Vilnius, 1992, no hot water in the capital city of Lithuania. In the city of the capital of Lithuania. But there was a summer camp near this, near where we were staying, which was frankly a libertarian group that had ventured off to the Baltic states as part of this World Libertarian Convention that I was a part of the U.S. delegation to. We started in Tallinn, Estonia. We made our way through the Baltic states. It was fascinating. But there was a camp with a bunch of kids. This is only 6 years removed from Chernobyl, who had been, frankly, terribly, catastrophically impacted by the radioactive poisoning emanating from the Chernobyl meltdown. So it was fascinating to see and interact with those individuals in that context as I was taking a break from Northwestern to go to some place that had a little bit more respect for freedom, like the Baltic states. Yeah, right. So, but it does. I mean, it does remind you about how precious and precarious this is. And the greatest president of the 20th century, Ronald Reagan, was religious about reminding people that freedom is just one generation away from extinction. It's something that has to be protected with each succeeding generation. We need to make the case over and over again. And so I'm reminded about what Jim was talking about. I had the opportunity to do a little cigar event last week with Dennis Prager, right? Great Dennis Prager. Yes. And one of the questions I asked him, just in terms of some of the issues that are au courant and that are really being fought over both at the federal level as well as in the states, pro-life issue. I know there's a lot of libertarians in this audience, and there may be differences of opinion on the pro-life issue. That's really not the point, is to debate that issue. It's the argument that Dennis Prager made in response to my question, which is why is the pro-life movement, 46 years into the fight after the Roe v. Wade decision, why is that the one cultural movement, it's the only one, really, if you think about it, that has actually been able to beat back the cultural Marxists over time through patience and diligence and intransigence, and put themselves and the country in the position where now the conversation is about what happens when Roe v. Wade is repealed in the next 24 months and sent back to the states. So, again, forget your position on the life issue and think about the pro-life movement as a political movement, in the same way you would think about movements that congregate around other issues as political movements. That's sort of an amazing thing when you have cultural Marxists in control, I would argue, of all of our other elite institutions and elite systems. So how have they been able to do it? And what did Prager say? Made the arguments. The pro-life movement consistently, maybe not always in its best iteration, but consistently over the last 4 decades, made the argument. You have to make the argument relentlessly, day after day, year after year, generation after generation, to audience after audience. And that's ultimately how you start to move hearts and minds around that issue. And it's the same thing as Jim was talking about with respect to free markets versus central planning. You have to religiously and consistently make the arguments relentlessly over time. That's the way you move people. Talk to the studies, which I'm sure you saw out this week, or the survey out this week. 4 in 10 Americans have a favorable view of socialism, and as you go down the age cohort, it ratchets up. But that's in the absence of an argument. That's a pollster's question. So you shouldn't be so throw up your hands and be despondent. Oh my gosh, we've lost. They ask a question of They ask a question in a way sometimes that is most favorable to the answer of, yeah, that sounds good, or in a way that is sort of most favorable to the ill-informed. But if you ask the question of, do you like Airbnb to a millennial, you get a much different answer. Well, what's Airbnb? What's that an example of? Obviously capitalism, creative destruction. Hotel rates come down, choice expands, quality of experience enhances. This was a very good Wall Street Journal editorial this week about Airbnb. So when you think about capitalism, don't argue it in the abstract, argue it in the specific. Hey, the Gen Xer, well, not the Gen Xer, but yes, including the Gen Xer, I guess, to some extent, but certainly the millennial and the Gen Zer in your life, do you like Airbnb? Well, then let's have a conversation about capitalism, because that's what it is. Do you like Uber and other aspects of the sharing economy that you benefit so much from in the 21st century in 2019 America? Well, if you do, that's what we mean when we're talking about capitalism, improving your quality of life and lowering the cost to access it. It's not that complicated. But you have got to be dogmatic and dogged about making the argument. And I think sometimes we forget that because we've watched the Free to Choose video series, and we've read Hayek, and we know Friedman, and we listen to Steve Moore when he's on Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy. See how I sort of embedded the plug? It's a professional. And so we know, so it's prosaic to us because we know the arguments. Always remember, the people who have read the books, an infinitesimal percentage of the populace, even for those who are inclined to freedom, those inclined to free minds and free markets, there's a lot of people who invoke the names and who have not read the books. No question. They have no idea what they're talking about. They're regurgitating top-line talking points the same way the left does when Ocasio-Cortez wages war against colonial cauliflower. They really are. Very few people have read the books. A lot of people can parrot the lines. Very few people have read the books. And even beyond that, You have just a marginal increase in people who can actually parrot the lines, who sort of generally get what we're talking about when we say that the free exchange between consenting individuals is a superior system, both morally and in terms of efficiency, to command control, where there's a little group of people who supposedly have this secret knowledge to order society just so among 330 million people or 6 billion people, as the case may be. You have got to relentlessly be intellectually curious, think about the arguments, share your knowledge, share the arguments. I always say this too, I mean, especially in this godforsaken state, when people say, you know, what can I do? What can I do? I give up. What can I do? And I understand giving in to fatalism. But remember, that's what the left wants you to do. What does fatalism breed? The status quo. Never give in to fatalism. That's not to say that you don't recognize the reality on the ground, but don't give in to fatalism. Just make the case. Just make the case in an environment that you have standing. So within your social circle, your friends, your colleagues, family, co-workers, co-parishioners, co-volunteers, share the knowledge you have. Don't assume they have it. Don't assume they've read the books, because most of them haven't. Don't assume they've heard the arguments, because most of them haven't. That's the way you start to change public opinion. I know that people who believe in free minds and free markets and a free society don't allow their lives to be consumed by politics, because they want to, you know, live life as a three-dimensional human being as opposed to a cardboard cutout political human being. I get it. But for the time that you devote to this space and to trying to influence others, particularly where you start with standing within your circles of influence, just remember that. And, you know, sometimes you don't even have to make the arguments. You know, read Constitution of Liberty. Read Free to Choose. I wouldn't say read Human Action. That's going to be a little bit of a homework assignment that few will be able to tackle, I think. But you know what I'm saying. Just impart knowledge. Open up people's minds by saying, consider this. It doesn't have to be browbeating. It doesn't have to be in hysterics. You know, the most hysterical people with, you know, wearing body parts on their head and so forth, they're least intellectual. Just don't be them. The response to them isn't to be them. The response to them is to be substantive. And just introduce people to ideas that maybe you think they've heard, but probably they haven't. And I think if we do that, we can be more successful locally and more successful nationally. And so that was, I just, you know, it's sort of an Occam's razor argument that Prager made, but it turns out to be true. It's so much more complicated and involved than just that reply, but making the arguments, just relentlessly, doggedly making the arguments, laying out the case, exposing people to scholarship they haven't considered so far. And frankly, that's what I try to do on my show every day. So I've got 4 hours a day and 20 hours a week. And I tell you, I mean, some of the smartest people I know and the most well-read people I know, they haven't heard every argument that is presented on the show from every guest that we have, or even occasionally when I lurch into an insight uncontrollably. So, I mean, it should be that, I mean, the great thing about the free market, free mind movement is it's comprised of a bunch of people that are intellectually curious, and they're looking for the next thing to consume. So just pass that on. The multiplier effect of that is vastly underestimated. Vastly underestimated. And that's why the Heartland Institute scholarship is so important, and all the scholars here and all the content that they produce, original content, thought content that they produce is so important, and think tanks like the Heartland in DC as well that have the same perspective but perhaps fill slightly different slots on that intellectual battleground. I think that's really the way to think about it. And with that, you know, I think especially in advance of Steve Moore, since I do friendly sort of battle with him and sometimes against him weekly on my show, why don't we start to like kind of make the ground fertile for robust discussion when he gets here? And I think you know, I think you got to talk about China trade policy. And, you know, Steve is a free market guy. Him and Art and Larry, the troika of free marketeers, which is an odd way to talk about free marketeers, using a Russian term. But thinking about what they're sort of indulging, Trump's dalliance with taxes, which is what tariffs are, Trump's dalliance with punishing our trading partners to try to get them to a more free market, a lower tariff, lower trade barrier environment. There's a lot of discussion about that, and that's good, robust discussion with fellow travelers on our side. We should have that discussion, because one of the things that I think you run into in terms of concern for Trump's reelection is if this continues and the negative impacts of taxes, tariffs, continues, do you have the possibility of Trump running interference with his own return to solid GDP growth and low unemployment in America, and run into that right as the time that people are considering who to vote for President of the United States, and open the door to, you know, the aspiring Soviet puppeteer, Bolshevik Bernie, or somebody else? I mean, these are real sort of like economic and political concerns that are coming together in the next 16 months, and we should talk about them in an intelligent way, think through them. So on trade policy, I know you like Trump, and I like Trump because he's not the other side. And I know China's a bad actor, you know, because they're communists. But is this the policy you want to see pursued to the bitter end, or is Trump overreaching here by punishing U.S. consumers in response to China punishing Chinese consumers? I think that's an interesting discussion. I'm sure Steve will have a lot to say about it, so why don't we figure out where we are first?
I will say, as an update, Steve Moore, I'm told, is 5 minutes out.
All right, so chop chop.
He's on 53 right now,
I hope he's not driving.
just passing Palatine Road. That's enough information. I think we got it. So we have time for a few questions, although you did use Troika and then fellow travelers
I know,
within 30 seconds of each other.
See, this is what the left does. So I'm taking their language and I'm making it ours. I'm redefining it.
Well done. Bob here has a question.
About a month ago, I saw postings on the internet with regards to his position on skilled workers, and that just lit up the internet with a bunch of people that I talk about with regards to the H-1B issue. And he is totally out of touch and not realizing what's going on with the skilled worker issue. I followed that issue back 20 years, 1998, when some of the engineering associations found out that it was not being operated properly. Right now, we're bringing in a lot of foreign skilled workers to staff Indian outsourcing firms. If you know how to surf the internet, over the years I've seen the skilled workers that the H-1B program employs a store manager for, of all things, Jimmy John's. You've got a soccer coach that was on an H-1B visa.
Well,
you've got the...
it's interesting, though, today, Bob, I don't know if you saw it, but Trump issued a memo on welfare benefits to workers that are sponsored here. Right, so if you're sponsored here and your employer, you're receiving employer benefits, then they're going to hold the employer responsible, because that's not supposed to be the case. So I like that he's tightening that up. I think he should be as aggressive as he has been rhetorically, but in policy form with respect to sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. And you want us to abide this sort of contradictory legal regime with respect to people who come here and seek asylum, and we're just supposed to release them into the U.S. population. Okay, well then we're going to release them into places that say that they're going to take care of them, and unfortunately that includes Chicago, Cook County, and Illinois. So look, I think, you know, if you could get to some sort of intelligent conversation about immigration in this country, then you do some sort of guest worker program like we have done previously, and you normalize it. But until you can eject people who are convicted felons and violent predators that are here in this country illegally, that the political class says should not be here, but they still remain here, or they get back here, then it's difficult to have a conversation about anything else, which I've said from the beginning. I mean, I'm a free movement of labor, free movement of capital guy. And I know not all conservatives are, not all Trump supporters are, but that's where I'm at. So I'm pro-immigration, pro-legal immigration, pro-skills, even pro-family unification to a certain extent. Not, your like idiot third nephew, but in terms of nuclear family. And, but they make it impossible when you have a story like came out of Prince George's County in Maryland, which we talked about on the show today, 2 MS-13 gangbangers in this country illegally, arrested in Prince George's County, Maryland, for attempted first-degree murder, released, ICE detainer not honored by Prince George's County. That was last year, May 2018. Last week, May 16th of 2019, those 2 on release, who shouldn't be in this country, murdered a 14-year-old girl. And I'm sick of those stories. And they just, those stories shut me down from having any sort of other conversation about what our immigration regime, legal regime should look like. Because if you can't do that first thing where everybody on both sides says they're on board to do, then I understand you're lying to me, you're disingenuous, and I'm not going to have a conversation about anything else until we have a solution to that first thing.
A question right here.
Donald Trump is a negotiator. Please remember that.
Yes. Okay.
Was there a question?
Right. Yeah, I get that. But I mean, the question is, how much punishment are we willing to endure in pursuit of his negotiation with Chinese communists who we can't trust regardless of what they agree to?
We don't know, nor do they.
Right. Yeah, so one other way to think about this, and this is what I'll put to my friend Steve, who's just pulling in here, is there's another way to think about this too, right? How do you exacerbate the internal contradictions in a communist system? If you don't have the Soviets do it voluntarily, the way that Gorbachev did with perestroika and glasnost, that openness was not about liberalizing the Soviet Union, it was about trying to stay in power, right? So the way that you do that is be preemptively free trade. Be preemptively low tariff, low tax, low trade barrier, to exacerbate the contradictions in their centrally planned economy, which is unsustainable, and which is why they've never realized the strength of their population numbers. So that's another way to think about getting to the same end that Trump wants to get to.
Question right here.
I was just going to say that I heard on the Prager interview George Friedman, and this is a big topic that's over our heads, but he seemed to think that China has a lot more to lose than we do, and a lot of this is not just the tariff, but it's all about how are we going to get them to stop stealing intellectual property. They don't make anything, really. They don't invent anything. They steal it. And this is sort of I have an importer friend who was over last night, and he said he's a Trump supporter. This is really hurting him. So I get it, but what else is going to make them stop behaving badly?
Yeah, but that's sort of the point too, and this is a perfect segue to introduce Steve Moore. Right? So what are we talking about if we don't believe that any deal we would negotiate is enforceable? Because the theft is not a bug in their approach to economic growth, it's a feature. That's what they do. So if theft is what they do and they say they're not going to do it, how could you trust it and how can you enforce it? Are we going to be on this endless hamster wheel? And that's why I say this is the John Wooden story, right? John Wooden, the greatest coach in organized sports in history, 10 championships in 12 years at UCLA. John Wooden never scouted his opponents because he said to his team, if we do what we're supposed to do, it doesn't matter what they do. And I hate sports metaphors for politics except when I use them. But that's the same approach that I would take to this. It doesn't matter what China does because we know central planning doesn't work. So forget what they're doing and focus on what we know should be done, which is to be low tax, low trade barrier, free markets, free minds, and we will outcompete these centrally planned communist societies, no matter how many people they have, like the Chinese. That's one thought. For other thoughts, perhaps we'll hear from our friend Steve Moore. And by the way, just by way of introduction, so I don't know if he's going to talk about this or not, so let me talk about this. So I've known Steve for a long time, and he's a great guy. And he's a super intelligent guy who has done 30, 40 years of work in advance of free minds and free markets and American values, along with his cohorts, Laffer and Kudlow and many others. And he was treated horribly in this process as a nominee to the Federal Reserve Board. And, and he's just a happy warrior, Reagan style, so he took the hammering, and he continues on to promote free market policies, to promote the Trump administration, to promote economic growth, to promote, aspirational capitalism. I mean, he really is one of the champions of capitalism in the last 50 years, he along with his partners in crime, so to speak. And he should be recognized for that. And the fact that he's a product of the North Shore of Cook County is even more remarkable. And the University of Illinois, it's even more remarkable. But Steve Moore is one of the most important economists of the last. He is. He's one of the most important. He's too humble. He's too humble to talk about it. But he's one of the most important economists of the last 50 years, and we should really thank him for the fight that he has put in inside the Beltway over the last 30. Steve Moore.
So, Dan, thank you for the kind words, Dan. And, Dan, I would have probably made it through this whole process if I hadn't done your damn show every Wednesday morning and, said all these crazy things. But anyway, thank you all for being here. I apologize for being late. We actually had a tornado today in D.C., so our flight was delayed for about an hour or so. Thank you all for being here. It's great to see so many friends. And look, I'm not going to say too much about this Fed process, only to say that I was kind of heartened by what the Wall Street Journal said, which was that I was defeated not because my ideas are wrong, but because my ideas are right. And they didn't want someone with my ideas on the Federal Reserve Board. But look, I'm happy to do what I'm doing. I talked to the president a couple of days ago. I may move over to the campaign or do something at the White House. So, what?
Mike.
Oh, you can't hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Is that better? Well, I'm just going to talk really loud. How is that? So anyway, I'm feeling good about things. I'm feeling good about. By the way, I saw the president. I went to a dinner the president was at weeks ago, and this was he had all these Republican governors in town, and it was really kind of a fun event. There were about 75 Republican governors. Is this working better? Is this better? Yes. So he's, look, I don't need this. I'm just going to shout. Can you all hear me in the back if I talk really loud?
You need it for the live stream. I can't hear you online.
Okay, so now you can hear me better. So the president has about 75 people there, including the governors, and he didn't have the teleprompter, so he was just going ad lib, and he loves to hear himself talk, so he's going on and on and on. And so he at one point he's just going on and on, and the governors are all kind of sitting in the front row, and they're drinking their beers and they're drinking their wine, just like many of you are. And at one point, President Trump says, "Hey, Governor, I don't drink, don't you?" And by the way, how many of you know that Donald Trump doesn't drink? And he says, I don't drink. And the governor kind of nodded his head, and he said, "Can you imagine me if I drank?" That was a great line. He is indefatigable. And by the way, one of the things that I really admire about Donald Trump is that throughout this whole process, I remember I called him a week or two before I dropped out, and I said, "Look, Mr. President, I'm getting all sorts of bad press on this stuff. Do you, if you want, I'll just, withdraw from the race." And he was like, "Are you kidding? Get back in that ring!" This is a guy who does not give up, and he does not give in, and he does not back down. And that's something I think that's very admirable about him. So I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with the economy. I wrote this book called Trumponomics with my good friend Art Laffer. By the way, you want some really cool news. I don't know how many of you have heard this, but Arthur Laffer is going to, in 2 weeks, win the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is really cool. He has been like a second father to me. I love Art Laffer, so we're going to have a big celebration for that. And by the way, our other kind of partner in crime, our silent partner in the book, who was kind of writing it with us when we got started, and then he was nabbed by Donald Trump to be the chief economist. How cool is it that the most important economist in the world today is Larry Kudlow? I mean, is that an amazing thing to see? I never thought that would happen, and he's doing great things. So anyway, the three of us really worked very closely with Trump during the campaign, and it was a lot of fun. And one of the things we talk about in the book is that, before, remember this time, it's been now 4 years now, but 4 years ago, the Republicans were where the Democrats were, right? Where there were something like, remember that 16, how many were there? 16 Republicans running for president at that time. Everybody from a very strong field, people like Jeb Bush and people like Marco Rubio and people like John Kasich and, the A team of candidates. And I think at that time I had met 15 of the 16 candidates. The only one I had never met was Donald Trump. And we had, and I have to tell you, I had a very negative opinion of Donald Trump before I met him. By the way, how many of you in this room were with Donald Trump from the start? Wow, so there were some. I was not. I don't think, you're still not. You're still not with Donald Trump. But, I went in with Larry, and we got a call that Trump wanted to meet us at Trump Tower on 56th floor on 5th Avenue. And we went in, and, we spent about an hour with him, and, I was kind of dazzled. I walked out of that room with stars in my eyes. I always say that about Donald Trump, that 95% of politicians you're going to meet in your lifetime are absolutely wonderful people in public and jerks in private. Trump is a jerk in public and a wonderful person in private. So he's the opposite of most presidential candidates. And we had some very respectful disagreements with him on issues. Dan, I'm a free trader, as I think most of us here are. If you're a member of the Heartland Institute, you have to be for free trade. And we had our disagreements with him on that, but he wanted us to work. And by the way, one of the reasons I've signed on with Trump is a very good reason. He had the look of a winner. Donald Trump is a winner, and and I was also impressed by the fact that he was really attracting blue-collar, working-class Americans who had traditionally voted Democrat, who were just fed up with both parties. And frankly, I think this election that we had in 2016 was voters expressing their kind of rage at both parties. It was a way of saying, pox on both of your houses. And so Trump wins the election, and we have this, and by the way, one of the most interesting things was, I think a lot about this now, is that during the campaign, we were debating a lot of Hillary's economists, and we were debating a lot of Obama's economists, and they were saying stuff like, if Donald Trump is elected president, he is going to cause the second Great Depression. Right? He is going to destroy the American economy. And then you had people, these were people like Paul Krugman and Larry Summers and the Washington Post editorial board and the New York Times editorial board and most of the faculty at the New York Times. They all basically said Donald Trump is going to be the worst president for the economy ever. He's going to cause a financial calamity if he is president. And I think about that a lot now because, of course, the left is saying, they're having a hard time right now, right? If you're a liberal, you have a hard time explaining how it is that the president who is going to cause a global financial catastrophe has created the best economy in 20 years. And it's a little hard to square that circle for them. And so one of the things have you noticed what they're saying right now? That this is the Obama economy. Right, this is just the continuation of Obama's policies, and Trump inherited a really good economy, which is, first of all, when we came into office, the economy was growing at 1.5%. That is not a booming economy, Dan. I don't think anybody could say a 1.5% growth rate is a booming. In fact, that's barely staying out of recession. The economy last year, for the last 5 or 6 quarters has grown at 3.2%. If my math is right, that's a doubling of the growth rate. And so they're having a hard time explaining why we have, this is the single best labor force in 50 years. If you're a worker looking for a job, this is the best time to be looking a job in virtually any of our lifetimes. We have the lowest black unemployment rate. We have the lowest Hispanic unemployment rate. We have the lowest female unemployment rate. We have the lowest unemployment rate for people without a high school and college degree. Now, I happen to think that this didn't happen by accident, that policy does matter. But, about 2 or 3 weeks ago when the latest jobs report came out, one of my last, visits to CNN. By the way, I promise I'm not going back to CNN. You were right, Dan. That was a big mistake. And anyway, so they were saying, this woman from the Washington Post said, well, this is just the, a continuation of the Obama economy. And the woman who was the moderator said, well, Steve, what do you think? Do you think that this, strong economy that we have right now is just the Obama effect? And I said, Martha, absolutely, this is the Obama effect. This is the effect that Barack Obama is no longer president of the United States. That, right? I mean, it really is, and it makes a big difference when you what we did. Sorry about that. That's Nancy Pelosi. When you have this booming economy, it doesn't happen by accident. So let me explain a little bit how this all came about, and then I'd love to take some questions from you. So these are some of the charts from the book. How do I get this thing to? Okay, so the first issue is, why were people so upset? Why did Americans take this big risk in voting for a guy who had never been in politics, an unknown in terms of his policies and so on? Why were people willing to vote for Trump? And one of the things I like to show this chart because this is basically looking at recoveries that we've had from recession. Obviously, when Barack Obama became president, we were in a huge recession, one of the worst recessions since the Great Depression. You all remember what happened to the housing crisis. And so, we've had something like 9 recessions since the end of World War II. And when you have a recession, you come out of the recession, usually you have a nice spring back in the economy to make up for the lost ground. And so what we did was we looked at the last, 8 or 9 recessions, and we said, what has the growth rate been? And you can see this light blue line. This is the average recovery from a recession. So over the 7 years, you'll get about a 30% increase in the GDP. The dark blue line is under Obama. And you can see that this is the reason people were so pissed off. This is why people were so angry, because the economy only grew about half as fast as it normally would during a recovery. And then I like to compare the Obama recession with the Reagan recovery, when Reagan came in. How many of you in this room remember 15% inflation and 20% mortgage interest rates? I mean, the American, Dan, you're just a baby, you don't even remember that stuff. But I mean, the American economy was flat on its back in 1980. I would make the argument that was the worst economy since the Great Depression. With all of those huge price increases, the huge taxes, they destroyed the economy. And so one of the reasons I like to compare this Obama recovery with the Reagan recovery is that you couldn't kind of think of two presidents who had more diametrically opposite views of how you deal with an ailing economy. Reagan, cut taxes, cut regulation, cut government spending, restored sound money. In one word, remember what Reagan said very famously in that debate against Jimmy Carter in 1980. Government is not the solution, government is the problem. That was Reaganomics in one sentence. Obama kind of opposite, right? Whatever the problem is, we got a government program. So we had 830, remember the $830 billion economic stimulus plan that didn't create a single net new job, and then you had Obamacare, and then you had the massive tax increases on the rich, and you had $10 trillion of additional, of additional debt and so on. And you can see what we got for that was this really flimsy recovery. And we estimate the economy would have been about $3 trillion larger by 2016 if we had had a Reagan-style recovery rather than the recovery that we had under Obama. And people felt the effect of that. Now, given that, let's look at the next one. Now, one of the things people always ask, what is Trumponomics about? What is the central focus of what Trump is trying to do? And this is a chart that we showed Donald Trump at our very first meeting with him. So it's kind of got some historical significance. And what we were trying to show here is, as we say, the power of expanding economy. Trumponomics is about two things. One, about being pro-America, being pro-business, that we put American interests first. And the second is that growth is everything. That if you grow the economy and make the economy grow faster and create more jobs, all of these other problems will not necessarily be solved, but they're a lot easier to solve if the economy is growing. And so, how many of you in this room would say that you're concerned about the size of the national debt? I mean, virtually everyone is. I mean, it's a massive debt, and you can see what happened in the last 2 years. These people won't leave me alone. Sorry about that. Let me turn this down. So in the last 2 years of Bush and the 8 years of Obama, we had an incredibly dreadful performance. And then you can see this is the projection. This is where we're supposedly headed with respect to the debt over the next 20 years if we stay on the course we're on. Now, here's a quiz question for you. What do you think is driving these horrible numbers with our debt? It's the aging of the population. It's the entitlement programs. It's the Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, Obamacare. All these things are driving up these massive debt numbers. Right now, the latest estimates are that about 10,000 Americans are retiring every single day. So that puts enormous strain on the budget, and so that's a big problem. And by the way, this is why we need more immigration, not less immigration, in my opinion, more legal immigration. But the other point is that the other thing that's driving these numbers is we looked at this chart and we're like, wait a minute, what's wrong with this? The Congressional Budget Office and the forecasters are estimating the economy would grow about 1.8 to 1.9% over the next 25 years. And we said, hell no, we're not going to grow 1.8 to 1.9%. We disagree with people like Larry Summers that says, the economy can't grow that fast. And we said, look, we're going to put in these policies that will grow the economy faster. And we estimated about 3.25% growth. And what happens is when you grow the economy, because as Albert Einstein used to say, the most powerful force in the universe is a compound interest, the compounding effect of a faster growing economy will stabilize the debt. And that, by the way, that's where we are right now at 3.25%. So growth is everything is one of the themes here, and that is happening. Now, this thing. Oh, there it is. I'll skip that one. Why is this going backward? How do I get this thing to? Okay. All right. Why isn't this thing moving? Okay. Next thing I wanted to bring up is the Fed, because I was one of the reasons that Trump nominated me to be on the Fed was because I had written a piece in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks before that about the curse of what the Fed is doing, and I happen to believe that the Fed has been too tight. And that this is holding back growth. And I said, as I said in this Wall Street Journal piece, that I think if the Fed were not so tight, that we would actually have about half a percentage point more growth, and that's a lot. And so what this is kind of trying to show you is what's going on here with the Fed made, in my opinion, two really, really bad decisions back in late 2018. So if you go back to the summer of 2018, we arrived at nirvana. We had 4% economic growth. We had high employment, falling unemployment, and no inflation. No inflation anywhere to be seen in the economy. Now, Dan, what's wrong with that picture? 4% growth, no inflation, high rising wages. It's a beautiful picture, right? It's exactly what we wanted to achieve. The Fed looked at that and said, "Oh my God, wages are rising. The growth rate is too high. We have to start raising interest rates." And that's what they did in September, and you can see when they did. I like to look at the CRB index is the index of commodities. It's looking at everything from food prices to home heating prices to copper and cotton and wheat and oil and so on. And these prices started to fall. The prices of commodities started to fall when the Fed raised interest rates. And by the way, the stock market was falling at about the same pace as the commodities were. And so here we have now, from September, October, and November, we have deflation. We have prices that are actually falling. And here is where December 19th, which was a week before Christmas, the Fed makes what I believe was a catastrophically bad decision. And the Fed decides to raise rates again in the face of declining prices. And they raised, by the way, Chairman Powell, you would think he might have bought a clue that he was doing the wrong thing, because while it took him 40 minutes to make the announcement, and in the 40 minutes he was making that announcement, the stock market fell by 700 points. It was a wipeout. And 2 weeks later, it had fallen by 2,500 points. So the Fed was way, way too tight. And maybe I got a little carried away, Dan. I said that it was one of the great acts of economic malpractice in the last 20 years. But it was really stupid. Now, I was vindicated, though, by the way, and others were. By the way, Trump agreed that the Fed was too tight, because remember, the day before Christmas, December 24th, I'll never forget this, the stock market the markets were only open half a day on December 24th. The stock market fell 600 points. It was the worst Christmas ever, right? And then in early January, the Fed decides, well, wait a minute, we made a big mistake. And they did make a big mistake, and we were kind of vindicated. They reversed course, and ever since then, things have been a lot better, though I would make the case to you the Fed is still too tight, and I think that they should cut rates by a quarter percentage point. The next one, whoops, can't get this thing to behave. What am I pointing this thing at anyway? Okay, keep going. Okay, so this gets to that issue of, remember, is there a Trump effect? Is there effect from Trump being in office? And these are kind of some cool charts. These come right from the book. These are basically what happened. Literally, the first one is small business optimism. And this picture, they've been doing this for 40 years, the NFIB. They call up small business. How do you feel about the direction of the economy? This was 24 hours after the election, literally a day or two after the election. Look at that. This was the biggest spike up in small business confidence in the history of this poll. That's a pretty amazing thing. I mean, it went straight up. By the way, it's remained high ever since. I mean, that's an incredible thing, and it's because people were inspired with confidence. Same thing with consumer confidence. It rose. It's remained high ever since. And then one of my favorites is, how do you rate the economy? Do you rate this is something that, again, they've been asking this question for 40 years. Do you rate the economy, poor, fair, good, or great? Throughout Obama's presidency, the average about. Let me put it like this. 3 weeks before the election, this question was asked, and 35% of Americans rated the economy as good or great. 35%. Anybody know what that number is today? 72%. 72%. That is a gigantic increase. And by the way, if these numbers stay anywhere near like this in 18 months, I don't care if they put Trump in jail. I don't care if the Democrats put up Mother Teresa. Trump is going to win a 40-state re-election landslide. I mean, people don't vote against prosperity, and boy, do we have it. So those are really good numbers. Now, then the question is quickly, and I'm gonna stop in a few minutes, but I just want to kind of go over how did it happen. So deregulation. Deregulation was huge. Trump has basically slammed the brakes on the regulatory process, and this is just one indication. Here's the trend in regulation under Obama, and like Trump's first year, they cut regulation by 36%. That's a big deal. By the way, the numbers just came out for 2018 by another 15%. So the pace of regulations has been cut in half. And Trump, remember in the election, he said, for every new regulation, I will eliminate 2. Remember that? He lied. So now it's for every new regulation, we've eliminated 20. And that has had a gigantic, that's never happened, never even happened under Reagan, and that's had a really liberating effect. This is my favorite Time magazine cover, Dan, of all time. This was from a year ago. For those of you who can't read this, it's The Wrecking Crew, how Donald Trump's cabinet is dismantling government as we know it. Now, this was supposed to be some kind of attack against Trump. My reaction is, hell yes, we're dismantling government as we know it. That's why we elected the guy, right? I mean, of course he's dismantling government as we know it. And so I just get that. That's one that it's going to be with me for a long time. Okay, trade. God, I'm trying. Okay, so maybe I'll kind of just end with this because the trade war is front and center right now, and then I'd just love to have a discussion with you on this stuff. So, is Trump doing the right thing? I think we've had about 15 discussions on your radio show. How many of you listen to Dan's radio show? I mean, it's a must listen. It's the highlight of my week. And Dan thinks I'm going soft. He thinks I'm a commie pinko because I have said some nice things about Trump's trade policies. And I'm just trying to explain what Trump is doing here. And I'd love you guys can intervene in this debate that Dan and I have been having about this. So when we first met with Trump, he said, I want to slam the Chinese and blah blah blah, and I'm going to be President Tariff and so Mr. Tariff and so on. And we told Trump, look, we disagree with you on this. We think Trump tariffs are bad. We think trade wars are bad. They're going to hurt the American economy and so on. And Trump said, look, I remember we said we said, Donald, we called him Donald back then, you're a protectionist. And I'll never forget, he slammed his fist on the table and said, I am not a trade protectionist. He said, I understand the value of trade. I understand, we need international commerce and so on. I've been a businessman my whole life. He said, but all I want is a level playing field. I want a level playing field. And he said, these other countries aren't playing by the rules. And he said to us, Larry and Steve, at least go look at the evidence. Look at the evidence and look at what, do you think the level playing field is level? And lo and behold, we started looking at the evidence, and Trump had a point. He had a point that these countries, and most of these countries, now look, Canada, I totally disagree with Donald Trump on NAFTA. I think NAFTA was a very positive thing. Making North America free trade area, that was Ronald Reagan's vision. That was a good thing. And so Canada and the United States have roughly the same level of these tariffs. But look at China. I mean, they have tariffs that are 3 times higher than we are. And by the way, the biggest problem with China is not their tariffs. It's their non-tariff trade barriers that make it extraordinarily difficult for American companies to do business in China. And so this is not Trump had a point. These other countries do have higher tariffs than we do. On average, most countries have tariffs that are about twice as high as we do. And we have trade deals with most of these countries. And so what we were basically trying to do was say, let's get these countries to cut their tariffs, and maybe we can cut our tariffs as well, so, we could have even freer trade. Now, I don't agree with Trump on auto tariffs. I think auto tariffs are a really bad idea. I don't agree with Trump on steel tariffs. I think steel tariffs have actually cost us more jobs than they've gained us. Let me see if I can pull this up. I'm having too much trouble with this thing. But, the steel tariffs have actually ended up costing us more manufacturing jobs because for every steel worker we have in the United States, we have 50 manufacturing workers who use steel. So you're not creating jobs by making, and by the way, the trade deficit, Trump obsesses over the trade deficit, and he's wrong about that. Every time the trade deficit goes, every time the economy does well, the trade deficit goes up, and every time the economy does poorly, we go into recession, the trade deficit goes down. I used to tell Trump, you want to get rid of the trade deficit, Mr. President? A good long recession will achieve that because, people stop buying stuff when there's a recession. And so he's wrong about this. But I'm going to make this point. And then, Dan, maybe we can have a reprise of our debate on your show. I think China is a menace. I think we're in an abusive trade relationship with China. I think this is the epic battle of our time. I talk to these kids on college campuses like, it's global warming. Global warming is not the epic battle of our time. The most important issue of our time is going to be whether it will be U.S. or China that's going to lead the world in the rest of this century. China cheats. They steal, they lie. There was we estimate about $300 billion a year of our intellectual property is stolen by China. They're involved in cyber espionage against the United States. They're hacking into our computer system. I think we're in a new Cold War with China. How many of you think that China is a big problem? So this is a battle that I don't like to have, but I don't see any other alternative. And I think Trump has strategically picked the right time to have this battle with China. Our economy is doing very well, obviously. When you look at this data, their economy is doing not that well. And this is, you always want to negotiate from a position of strength, not weakness. And so that is why Trump is doing it. The other thing you have to understand about Trump, why is he picking this fight with China? It's simply this, that China is, look, he looks at it like this. If we can't trade with China, he used to tell me this, if we can't trade with China, we sneeze. If they can't trade with us, they catch pneumonia. And that's true. Their economy cannot grow. They cannot grow if they don't have access to America's, multi-trillion-dollar consumer market. And Trump is using this leverage to try to get a better deal. Will he prevail? I think he will. I think we are going to get a deal before the end of this year, because I think the tightening of the screws, this 25% tariff, is going to do significant damage. But I may be wrong about that. I mean, my biggest worry, because who's the other major presidential candidate out there? Joe Biden. Did you see what Biden said the other day? 2 weeks. China's our friend. He's a pacifist when it comes to China. Who do you think the Chinese want to be the president in the next 4 years? Do you think they want Donald Trump or Joe Biden? They obviously want Biden, and my worry is that the Chinese will just simply say, we're going to wait out Trump. We're going to swallow these tariffs. It may do damage to us, but it's going to do damage to them, and then we'll get to deal with Joe Biden, and things will be much better. So that's the kind of worry that I have, is that they're going to wait him out. But I just think in the end he is going to prevail here, and if I am right, and I'll kind of stop with this, if I am right that we get a trade deal before the end of this year, you think the economy is good now? Wait until we get a new trade deal with China. It's going to be like taking a champagne bottle and taking that cork out. It's going to be an explosion. It really is, because this is the only thing right now that's holding back the U.S. economy, is this dark cloud of this trade war. So I think it's going to work. I'll tell you one last story, just to round this out, about how good the economy is. I was in Houston, Texas, about a month ago, and I was walking down the street, and this Hispanic woman was walking the other way, and she came up to me, and she was, as I passed her, she kind of grabbed me by the shoulder, and she said, hey, are you the guy I see talking about economics on TV? And of course I said, no, that wasn't me, that must have been somebody else. Because I don't like to get into arguments with people, but she seemed kind of nice, and so I said, that was probably me, and she said, you're Steve Moore, aren't you? And that was flattering. And I said, yeah, that's very, and I didn't know quite whether she was going to slug me or what. But she says, oh, I just want to shake your hand, which was very nice. And I said, yeah. And she said, I want to tell you something. She said, I did not vote for Donald Trump. She said, I don't even like Donald Trump. She said, but I got to tell you something. She said, I just got a $2,500 bonus from my employer. $2,500. And she said, for the first time in 5 years, I will be able to take a vacation this year. It kind of got me here. I mean, that's what this was all about. This was not about helping rich people. It wasn't about helping big corporations. It was about helping middle class and people rise up the living standard. And we're seeing that with the wage increases. And she said, tell Donald Trump thank you. And that was kind of a cool moment. And the other kind of incident I'll tell you, and I promise I'll stop with this, is the last chapter of the book is called "A Light Switch is Flicked from Off to On." And where does that come from? That came from about 6 months after the election. I was in Cleveland, Ohio, outside of Cleveland. And wherever I go, I always ask people how's business, whether they own a corner grocery store or they're the CEO of a major company. And I said to this guy, Joey, who owned a auto repair factory. So he had a little auto repair shop. And he said he had about 25 employees. And I said, Joey, how is business? And he said, Steve, it's like the day after the election, a light switch was flicked from off to on. And he said, ever since then, I have had more business than I can handle. And I get that all the time, wherever I go. When you have 7.5 million job openings today, 7.5 million, that's larger than the entire population of the state of Indiana. That's amazing. That's how many people and by the way, there's 6 million unemployed people officially. So if my math is right, I'm not too good at math, but if my math is right, so even if we put every single American who is looking for a job into a job today, you'd still have 1.5 million jobs left over. That's a booming economy. Thank you very much for being here, and happy to take whatever question. Dan, you want to come on? Let's go.
Sure.
Come on. Give me your best shot, Dan.
Right.
I'm ready for you.
So I mean, those heartwarming.
I want your trade thing, because you don't agree with me on this.
I know,
trade.
and I hate to be, rain on your parade with those heartwarming stories, but. So here's the thing, and you sort of conceded the point. Imposing $900,000 in cost on U.S. consumers to protect or create every steel job, that's not sustainable.
So by the way, this is the chart I was trying to get. You can see, just so
Right.
people can see, these are the steel jobs that we've been created by the steel tariff. So that's the steel. And obviously, if you protect an industry, right, and you make the foreign imports more expensive, you're going to create jobs in that industry. But these are all the industries that use steel, and you can see on net we've actually lost jobs. So I agree with you on steel.
And $15 billion in price supports for farmers is not a sustainable model either for ag products.
Yep.
And so the combination of that plus cutting into the cost you're imposing on consumers, the $2,500 bonus your friend in Houston got, right, in terms of her actual disposable income. So how do you make the assessment to say China's on a different schedule than Trump is? Trump's on a 2020 schedule. China's on a schedule. We just have to prevent revolution. So how do you make the call to say we're imposing too much cost on consumers and we need to start providing relief to U.S. consumers before the 2020 election if we can't get a deal with China?
So, look, I mean, you raise a great point. I can't. It's hard to argue with what you're saying. Except I will say this. We've done some analysis. Not me, but others have done analysis of, what were the impact of the 10% tariffs? Because we had the 10% tariffs for about a year now, and some of the I watch TV, CNBC or Fox Business and these shows, and they say the entire cost of those tariffs was borne by the American consumer. That's completely wrong. It's terrible economics. If the Chinese could just raise their prices by 10%, they would have done it 5 years ago, right? I mean, we don't believe in cost push pricing. And what happened from the 10% tariff, there's pretty good evidence that most of the cost of the 10% tariff was not borne by American consumers. The Chinese companies ate that. And the Chinese government subsidized them so they could continue to sell their stuff. So in that case, it was like a gift to the American economy. We got the stuff for the same price, plus we got $15 billion of revenues from them. Now, 25% is going to be a different story. That's some of that will be cost passed on to consumers. You're right about that. We don't know what. I mean, let's say a rule of thumb, half of that cost will be borne by the Chinese and half of it will be borne by American consumers. And the question is, and I mean, this is for everybody to decide for themselves, is it worth it? Is it worth it to win this battle against China and have some short-term pain for long-term gain? My biggest worry is the one that you just said. I'll say it again. If the Chinese basically say, we're just going to wait this guy out, then you can have a wobbly economy in 2020. The people say, oh, Trump isn't running the economy right. We elect somebody like an Elizabeth Warren or a Kamala Harris or a Joe Biden, and then you've got a worse situation. So I'm not denying this is a high-stake showdown. Now, let's just do a poll in this room. How many of you support what Trump is doing on China? How many of you don't support what China? So, are you his father? I'm just teasing. So, I mean, I think, right, at least for now, I do think the American people are behind Trump. But, as this goes on, and the pain is felt.
And he has the added benefit of there's not a lot of daylight between him and all the Democrat socialist candidates for president in terms of his posture with China. Now that should also be indicative if Kamala Harris is agreeing with your policy on China, maybe you should reconsider your policy.
Good point. Touche. Okay, sir.
If importers are looking at 25% tariffs in, let's say, 6 or 9 months, won't a lot of them try to move their production out of China?
Yeah, that's happening now. I mean, there was a big article in the Wall Street Journal about, we buy a lot of T-shirts from China, clothing, textiles. Guess what? Vietnam produces a lot of textiles. So, and that's the effect Trump wants. We want to move that stuff out of China. And by the way, for Trump to win here, one of the things that I've been saying is, look, let's get the U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement done, right? We've got to get Nancy Pelosi to bring that thing to the House floor, because one way of defeating China here, in my opinion, is to isolate them in the world economy. They're the bad actors. The Europeans are getting pretty frustrated with the Chinese. They are stealing their intellectual property. I mean, these are not people who play by the rules. They violated every aspect of the World Trade Organization. So I like the strategy of trying to, let's get these trade deals done with Japan. Trump's going out to Japan in 2 weeks. Let's get a trade deal done with Japan. Let's get USMCA done. Let's get a European trade deal done. And so then we can aim, the whole world can be aimed at China.
So is Trump using the $2 trillion infrastructure bill as a feint to get those deals done?
As a what?
As a feint, as a juke to get those trade deals done? Or does he want to do both?
He wants the infrastructure bill. He really wants that done. But you saw what happened. You also saw what happened when he walked out yesterday. I mean, he's frustrated with Pelosi. I mean, Pelosi is part of the resistance. They, in my opinion, I think it's very unlikely that they're going to bring that USMCA to the House floor. If it were brought to the House floor, it would pass almost certainly. But they don't want to hand a single victory to Donald Trump. And Trump is right. All they care about is impeach and investigate. They have no legislative agenda of their own, and it's a shame. I mean, we're kind of paralyzed.
But let me just ask you a follow-up to address the other half of that. Is the fact, if that does come to pass, is sort of the indirect benefit that you won't do a $2 trillion boondoggle, which is just doubling down on those shovel-ready projects that weren't shovel-ready from a decade ago.
Right. So, look, my opinion is, do we need an infrastructure bill? Yes. Should it cost taxpayers a penny? No. I mean, we need infrastructure in this country. We need it. And you know what we need? We need pipelines. We need LNG terminals. We need refineries. We need to fix our ports. We need better airports. I mean, Midway needs to be fixed. I would have been here a half hour ago if it, And so there's no reason that has to be paid for with the public dollars. All of that could be paid for by with private money. I mean, I'll give you just one other thing I forgot to mention, which is really important here. I mean, it's a big part of is this. I mean, you want to see a beautiful picture? Look at this. This blue line is our increase in American oil production, and the red line is the reduction in American imports of oil. How many of you are aware of this? For the first time in 50 years, the United States of America is now producing more oil and gas than we're consuming. I mean, that is an awesome thing. And by the way, your good friend Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants to shut it down. She just, no oil. I mean, by the way, when I mentioned I was in Ohio, have anybody been to Ohio lately? It's booming. Ohio and Pennsylvania are producing more natural gas because of the Marcellus Shale than anywhere else in the world today. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful picture. So, that's another part of this is using American oil and gas exports to increase our markets. And look, I think this Green New Deal stuff, I mean, this is the most dangerous thing I've ever seen. Yes, sir.
If you have a question, please raise your hand and a microphone from Billy will come to you. We're going to go to Dan Rodman right here. You had your hand up, and I know you
Oh, sorry. Hi, Dan.
So we have tariffs, which I believe is the threat to shoot yourself in the foot.
Uh-huh.
China is a member, I believe, if I recall correctly, of the International Trading System.
The World Trade Organization, yeah.
WTO.
By the way, they violated every single precept of that.
Why not stop with the tariffs and go to the World Trade?
Because the WTO is a totally feckless organization. The WTO is completely impotent. I mean, this is the line in Washington. Oh, we'll just take you to the World Trade Organization. Come on. From the day that they've been in the WTO for over 15 years now, and they've violated every single precept, and nobody's ever done anything about it. I mean, it's like saying, gee, Germany, you can't invade Poland. We're going to go to the United Nations. I mean, these international organizations are completely feckless and impotent in terms of dealing with these kinds of problems. And so I just don't see the WTO as any kind of solution to this. I do think we made a big mistake 15 years ago in letting China become part of the WTO. How many of you agree? We should not have had, China. They're not acting like a trade partner should act. And I guess then the question is, what is the alternative to what Trump is doing? And I mean, I'm not asking that in a smart aleck way. If somebody has a better alternative to tariffs, let me know what they are, because I don't think that they're going to respond to anything but brute force at this point. Trump taking a club and bashing them over the head.
How about removing them from the WTO?
It doesn't matter. I mean, so all you do if you remove them from the WTO, then you can remove them from the trading system. But that's what we're doing with the tariffs. We're basically saying you're not a honest broker in trade, and we're not going to trade with you anymore. We're going to sock you with these tariffs. I mean, I'm sorry. I do think Trump might have made a mistake in pulling the United States out of the trade partnership, the TPP, so we could have Japan and Singapore and Thailand and all these other Asian countries. Because do you all know China was not part of the TPP? So this gets to the point of isolating them as the bad actor. What else?
Right here, Gary, right here.
I think it's going to be very difficult for Trump to be reelected
Uh-huh.
without the farm vote.
Without the
And-
farm vote, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And even though it was mentioned that we can't continue this huge subsidy, do you realize what that subsidy might mean to just a small-time farmer? Try a penny a bushel for his corn and a check for $20.
So,
Do you think that
yeah, no,
farmer's
I think
going
this is a
to
good point. And
reelect
here I look, I've got a couple comments on this. First of all, we have had an investigation now for 2 years that's cost $50 million called the Mueller Report. And what was that all about? It was about Russian interference with an American election. By the way, we are all against foreign governments interfering with an American election, right? We're all against that. How about China? I mean, they are brazenly and openly saying we are trying to interfere with an American election by targeting terrorists to Trump voters so they won't vote for him. Where is the outrage by the left on that? I mean, wouldn't you agree that's direct interference by a foreign government in our elections? And they are targeting our farmers. They're targeting Midwestern voters and so on because they don't want Trump to be president. Now, I would say that there is kind of rough justice in this. I know, Dan, I'm cringing in saying this because I know you don't like this position, but the farmers are taking the brunt of the attacks from China. So why not use the $15 billion we raised from the terrorists from China to hold the farmers? I don't like subsidies, but in this case, you're in a war here. We're in a war here with these people, and we protect the people who've been damaged by the tariff war, and give them the money. And by the way, it's not coming from your pocket or my pocket. It's coming from the Chinese. They're the one who are going to bail out now. What's wrong with that logic?
Well, I mean, a number of things. I mean, starting with first principles, but it goes to the sustainability model, which you said. That's not a sustainable approach. So
It's not sustainable. I agree with
Right.
that.
So at what point do you say that sort of being punitive, you stick a shiv in the eye of your consumers, your nationals, and we do the same to ours, and we see who can wait each other out, and that we're on different electoral schedules.
That's
At
true.
one point do you say that that's not sustainable politically in addition to what we already know economically?
I mean, it's a fair point. I mean, and I think that you're going to get no argument from me that this is a very risky strategy. It is a very risky strategy, and it may work and it may not. Yeah.
Right here.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, thanks a million.
I got it.
Thanks a million for coming here as an Illini, two Illini. I've met you a couple of times with Joe
By the way, let
Walsh,
me just
et
interrupt
cetera.
you 1 second here, if I may, because you just reminded me of something. And what the hell is wrong with Springfield? I wrote a column last month. I think we talked about this on your show. The 4 states of the apocalypse. The 4 states of what are those? New Jersey? New York? California? Not Connecticut. Connecticut's number 5 on the list. Connecticut and Illinois. New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Illinois. They are fiscal disaster areas. And by the way, those 4 states have the highest taxes in the country. The 4 states with the highest taxes have the biggest fiscal problems. And what's Illinois' solution? Raise taxes again. I mean, I got to tell you, I go all over this great country of ours. I go to Arizona a lot. I go to Florida a lot. I go to North Carolina a lot. I go to South Carolina a lot. All I see, ladies and gentlemen, is Illinois license plates. I mean, it is getting, and remember we talked about this on your show. Things are so bad in Illinois right now, you're losing population to West Virginia. Come on. I mean, what's wrong with that? I mean, Dan, do people in Illinois have any idea how much trouble the state is in?
Well, the ones that are living in other states do.
I mean, this is a disaster. And if you pass, does anybody really believe that this tax increase that Pritzker wants will only hit, what is he saying, it's only hit 3 out of 100?
The top 2%.
Does anybody believe that? Raise your hand if you believe that. I mean, it is the biggest BS line. And if Illinois voters are stupid enough to pass that, then you deserve the fate of your state. I love Illinois, by the way. I grew up here. My sister here, my brother-in-law are here. They live in Illinois. Most of my family's here. It's a disaster. It is a disaster. I mean, I've got a radical idea. Why doesn't Illinois get rid of its income tax, like Florida and Texas and Tennessee and New Hampshire? I mean, there are 9 states that have no income tax at all. This state is taxing itself to death. You're drowning in taxes. And you know, my friend who just bought a house in Tennessee said he's saving so much money on his taxes that's paying for the house he's building in Tennessee. It's just, I mean, it makes me want to pull my hair out to see the, and then they say, oh, Pritzker wants to run for president. Oh my God, you know, phew. Sorry. But I love Illinois. I do. But I just hate to see how the politicians have destroyed the state.
But you know, you keep talking about politicians destroying the state. Politicians don't destroy the state. The morons who elect them do.
That's very true.
Now, let me just say
That's very
something
true.
before I forget everything that I wanted to say, because I'm a 75-year-old fart and I tend to forget things if I'm not reminded. But the bottom line is that we've all seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life. What happened? There was sacrifice involved. 2-3 weeks ago, we had the Ayn Rand conversation here. The America of today is not what it was before. We are not. My fellow Americans, I don't even recognize half of them. They voted for this guy who says he's going to raise taxes. Now, all that said, what I wanted to bring up is you are the only one I know that has Donald Trump's ear. I elected Bill Clinton twice by working my ass off for Ross Perot. Ross Perot and charts turned me on. Charts turned everyone else on here. Get Trump to start showing charts like that.
I agree.
Because people are visual learners. You can talk and talk and talk. But please, please. And if I see some charts, I'll think that I may have had a little benefit.
No, look, it's a great pick. You know, and you know, every time I've had a meeting with Donald Trump, I always take charts in. Because Donald Trump doesn't like to read. He likes to look at pictures. He likes to look at pictures. So, you know, but a picture truly is worth 1,000 words. And, you know, Reagan used to do this. He'd give national addresses and he'd say, here's the Democrat tax plan, you get this, and here's the Republican tax plan, you get that, and people could visualize it. I love that idea. I will bring that back. I think he should use it in the State of Union. I think he should use it in every speech that he gives, and just say, and he should show how well the economy is doing. I mean, the numbers are spectacular. I'll show you just a couple more. I mean, you got me going here, but this is really good stuff. If I could ever figure out how this thing works, well, never mind. But I mean, there's so many. Oh, this is a fun one, by the way. I mean, this is really fun. You're probably wondering what this is. Yeah. So, you remember I mentioned the 4 states of the apocalypse. New York is one of them. So what you're looking at here is, this is Pennsylvania. Okay, this is Pennsylvania. I believe this is, is this Ohio? Yeah, West Virginia. And this is Ohio. Sorry, yes. So,
is there a geography?
So this is Pennsylvania, and so this whole area is what's called the Utica Marcellus Shale, which is the biggest a deposit of natural gas in the world. And of course, thanks to fracking and horizontal drilling, we finally figured out how to crack the code and get at this. And this up here, anybody know what state this is? This is New York. Now, New York, you think your politicians are stupid in Springfield. Get a load of the people in Albany. So in their infinite wisdom in Albany, starting with the governor there, Cuomo, they have decided that they are not going to allow any shale oil and gas drilling. No. We're way too good for that. We're not going to allow this to happen. And so you can see, because I was actually up here not long ago, all of the wells, these dots are the wells that are being drilled. Look at this. They're all on the New York-Pennsylvania border. And so what they're doing in Pennsylvania, these people aren't stupid. They're drilling down, going horizontally under New York and taking out all their oil and gas. I mean, is capitalism a great thing or what? So, but by the way, all the jobs, all the economic activity is here. And this is upstate New York, which is incredibly economically depressed. And these idiots, these dingbats, will not allow the jobs to, and they won't allow pipelines, by the way. This is the latest thing. They won't allow the pipelines to get up to Boston. So people in Boston, I mean, this is almost sinister. When in the cold winters, the people in Boston have to get their natural gas from Russia because we don't have pipelines to take this gas. I mean, how really? I mean, that's just outrageous. Okay, and 1 or 2 more, and then I know you guys are tired.
Right back there. No, we keep going.
All right.
So, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And I'm waiting for the camera to point over at me here, too. We're on the live YouTube feed here. So you mentioned Pritzker's a disaster for Illinois. I was one of 2 Republicans who attended the Lori Lightfoot inaugural of 5,000 people on Monday. Stephanie Trussell and I went to it. So do you think there's any hope with Lori Lightfoot? She's talking about getting rid of corruption. She's talking about making everybody equal. Is there any hope with this new mayor over Rahm Emanuel?
I don't know.
No.
Nice try, though. Okay, next question.
We'll go right here. Hello, Nancy.
What I think, Steve, thank you for coming. I'm very disappointed as a person who's 81, knowing how the American people are nowadays. They expect very cheap goods. They've been spoiled. They don't know how to sacrifice. China has a long, long plan of taking over America, and most Americans don't even know what is happening. And then you have Wall Street and people from the firms who want good trade, or they want free trade, not fair trade. And what we have to realize, we need fair trade, or we are no longer a nation. We're going to be taken over by China, and that's it for our nation.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, I'm a little bit more optimistic. I think the American people do understand the stakes here. I really do. I think they understand that this is as I said, an epic battle that we cannot the worst possible solution right now would be for Trump to fold his tongue. I mean, that would only make China even more emboldened to engage in the kind of illegal trade activities they're involved in. So, I think the American people are behind him on this. I really do. I think they get it, that this is the new Cold War that we're in.
Hey, Steve, is it time for the president to make a national address, to use his bully pulpit, to borrow your charts, and make the case for his trade policy as well as his approach to immigration?
Yeah, it is, and I think he could make a strong case. I was going to. Oh, by the way, this is the dividend from the cheap oil. I mean, we have the lowest cost energy in the world today, and this is one of the reasons manufacturing can come back. I mean, it's incredibly stupid for the left to say, let's not use our fossil fuels. I mean, that's the stupidest that we have more fossil fuels than anybody does now. I mean, it would be like saying to Nebraska, stop growing corn. I mean, we have more of this stuff than anybody else does. We have more coal. We have more natural gas. We have more oil. We have 500 years worth of coal. We have 300 years worth of natural gas. I hope there's nobody in this room who thinks we're running out of this stuff, right? We're not running out of it. We're running into it. And this gives us a gigantic strategic advantage. If you're the country that controls energy, now think about this. There's something very sinister about this Green New Deal. If you wanted to destroy a country's economy, how would you do it? You would disrupt their energy supply, because everything we have, that beer you're drinking, the coat I'm wearing, the hat you're wearing, the computer you're tapping on, the food, everything is derivative of energy, right? If you don't have energy, you don't have anything. And if you really want to destroy an economy, make energy much, much more expensive. And incidentally, who are the people, Dan, who will suffer the most with rising prices of energy? Poor people. It's a regressive tax. So the idea that you're going to make energy more and more expensive, and I told this story on your show the other day, I think you all know it, that when you had your polar vortex here in February, your solar panels and your windmills froze, right? And so wind and solar are wonderful when you least need energy. And literally thousands of people would have frozen to death if you had your energy go out, if you were 100%. Do you have these renewable energy requirements here in Illinois?
E85, yeah.
What are they?
E85 and things like that,
God,
sure, at the pump.
Awful. Okay.
We got time for two more.
Got
one here in the back.
Thank you. Hello, Steve.
Hi.
I was a teacher for 30 years, and I happened to teach at New Trier High School.
Yep.
And I happened to teach in the 70s. And as I recall, you were a student in the 70s. And I recall that you graduated from New Trier.
Did you teach me?
Unfortunately not. But I'd like to say to you that I'm very proud to be a member of the faculty that produced students like you. Many.
Oh, that's a very nice thing to say. Thank you. Thank you. Wait, you were at University of Illinois, or?
Pardon me?
But were you at U of I, or?
New Trier.
New Trier. Oh, even better. Yeah.
I think you
My
graduated.
sister there is a New Trier graduate too, right?
I
right
think
over
you
there.
graduated in '76, but I'm not sure.
I graduated in '78.
78.
Yeah.
Okay. What I was going to say is, tonight you're saying how many people like this and
Yeah,
how many people are for Trump, but you're looking at a specific generation. And as a teacher, I'm concerned about a generation that's beginning to vote, and they're out of control. And I hear all the time, we've got education, we've got to educate them. It's not going to work. You don't educate in the way that people are talking about education. First of all, the purpose of education for high school students and college students is to learn how to learn. That's really the only important thing.
That's true.
With the exception of maybe doctors and lawyers that go on specifically out of college, everyone else kind of flounders. The second part of it, in learning, people talk about their teacher. We need better teachers. The college professor is bad. I don't like him. Has nothing to do with it. Everyone has only one teacher. That's themselves. Now that's subtle, but I like to talk about teaching by osmosis, a scientific term that means to seep in. And we need to get more seep in our society with people talking about why you're in college, not what you're learning. Why are you there? Why are you in high school? And what are you doing? And what does your teacher have to do with anything? Your teacher presents material, that's it. But your teacher doesn't learn. We're on the wrong track. We can talk about the farmers, we can talk about coal miners, we can talk about everything. That's not the point of what's going to go on in our country eventually.
So let me respond to that, because I mean, there's a lot there, and I agree with almost everything you just said. I mean, I think that's so true. A couple of points in response. I was just looking at the polling. I was over at the Republican National Committee looking at their latest polling data. And it's not push polling. I mean, they want to figure out what's going on with the voters. There is one demographic group that Trump is getting absolutely destroyed by. What demographic group do you think that is?
Millennials.
Millennials. You know what the numbers are? 85 to 15. 85 to 15. Wait a minute. We have the strongest economy in 30 years, and only 15% of millennials are for Trump. That is a big. Luckily, millennials don't vote, because if they vote, we're in big trouble. But so I think about somebody like we've had this discussion on your show, Dan. You think about somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, I actually there's things I like about her. I love her irreverence. I love her energy level, and I just think her spunk. I love that about her. But she's just wrong on everything, right? I mean, on everything she's wrong. And people say, how could she believe these things that she believes? And my response to that is, that's a very simple answer to that. She's just regurgitating everything she's been taught since she's been in the 5th grade. I mean, it's amazing to me these kids even come out as level-headed as they do. And who's responsible for this? We are. We let the left take over the education system. We let them do this. And they have indoctrinated our kids now for 25 years. And what they're spitting out is people who AOC is smart. She just has no wisdom. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She knows nothing about the real world. And this is a big problem. It is a gigantic problem. I always say the two most important industries in America, to me, are healthcare and education.
And our biased media.
Yeah, and our media. But think about this, healthcare and education. Now, what are the two industries in America that have the highest price increases? Healthcare and education. Why? I always ask my liberal friends, why do we have the government play such a huge role in education and healthcare? They say to make it more affordable. Gee, they're doing a wonderful job of it, right? I mean, my son is going off to Villanova next year, $72,000 a year. Here's an issue. The Republicans couldn't sell water in the middle of a desert. I mean, they are so bad at this issue is so teed up for the Republicans. The biggest financial scam in America, bar none, by far the biggest financial scam in America, is how much colleges and universities are charging our families. Do you all agree with that? I mean, it is totally outrageous. Every university and college should have tuition that's no more than half of what they're charging right now. And they could easily do it and still provide a high level of education. And why don't they? Well, one reason is because we keep providing all this government aid to education and universities, and it's ridiculous. By the way, what do the Democrats keep saying? Oh, more aid to the schools so they can reduce tuition. Every time we increase the student aid, the Pell Grants, Dan, what do you think the colleges and universities do?
Increase the tuition.
They raise their tuition, right? I mean, they're not stupid, and so we're like a dog chasing its own tail. I'll tell you one. There's so many directions I could go with this. By the way, I do have 2 sons that are millennials, and I'm always complaining. I hate the millennials too. I just can't stand millennials. And finally my oldest son Justin got sick of me railing against millennials, and he said, "Dad, who do you think made us this way?" And I thought, touche, we did. We're the ones who gave them, the trophies for just showing up, that kind of thing. So we do have ourselves a little bit to blame. With AOC, I'll just end by saying this. What's the old saying? If you're not a socialist before the age of 30, you have no heart. And if you're still a socialist after the age of 30, you have no brain. So AOC is 29 years old. I'm going to give her 1 more year. But Bernie Sanders is 70 years old, and he's spouting off this stuff. But no, it's a real problem. We need to take back our education system. And by the way, you're right. Almost all learning is self-learning. And the reason you have school is to learn how to learn. And we're not doing a very good job of that right now. We're not. One more, and then we'll end.
Question from the audience over here.
I wanted to ask you if you will remind, that's my question, will you remind the Donald of this event? Because I was like berserk when I heard Biden say that this economy is because of the Obama administration. How come Barack Obama said when we were in that recession period, this is the new norm, get used to it?
Great point. And by the way, my favorite quote from Barack Obama is, it was about 3 months before the November 2016 election. And you may recall, Obama said, Donald Trump says he's going to bring back all these manufacturing and mining and construction jobs, and he says he's going to get to 3% growth. How's he going to do that? By waving a magic wand? Well, maybe he has a magic wand because we've got all those things. It was Larry Summers. He was a president of Harvard University. He was a chief economist for both Obama and Bill Clinton, who said the U.S. economy is a period of secular stagnation. How many of you have heard that term, secular stagnation? And what that means is we've reached a cap. We cannot grow faster than 2%. It's impossible. Now, why did they say that? And then when Trump came along, he said, we're going to get 3 to 4%. Trump's so great, by the way. Larry Kudlow and I would lay out this platform and say, sir, if you do these things, the energy policy and the tax cuts and the deregulation, all these things, we think we can get to the 3-4% growth. He'd go, I want 5% growth, I mean, that's Trump. I mean, he's the ultimate optimist. But, people, when Trump would say, we can have 3 to 4% growth, the left was indignant about this. They're like, 3. Wait a minute. If the Messiah couldn't get us to 3 to 4% growth, how is Donald Trump going to do it? And here we are. We've arrived at this point. It is a booming economy. I think if we keep this going, I mean, it's harder and harder for the left to make their point. And I think at the end of the day, look, what do people vote for in presidential elections? Presidential elections are extraordinarily different animals than midterm elections. In midterm elections, people vote about education, health care, pre-existing conditions, all these micro issues that are bothering them. That's not what people vote for in presidential elections. In my opinion, almost every election going back to when Thomas Jefferson was elected president, people vote on 2 things: the economy, their economic security, and their national security. Come on, what Democrat is going to beat Trump on national security and this booming economy? I don't see it happening. I don't see people. Incidentally, when people say, "Oh my gosh, he's only got a 42% approval rating," you know what Donald Trump's approval rating was the day he was elected president in November of 2016? 38%. That means there are a lot of Americans who don't approve of him, who don't like him, who still voted for him. Now, he had the advantage of running against the most disliked person in America, Hillary Clinton. I don't think they're going to do that again. But I feel pretty confident. This guy is a winner. I would not bet against him. Thank you all. Thank you for having me.
We're gonna have a tip jar up front for Steve Moore's son's Villanova education.
Yes, I need
before
it.
you leave.
I need that.
But otherwise, give a round of applause to Steve Moore.
Thank you, Doc. Thanks for coming. Okay, you got to get up early, right? What time do you get up? 4 in the morning? Thank you, folks.
Okay, so Steve will be here. There's a lot of people between this stage and the door, so if you all band together, they can't leave until later. But there's still more copies of the great Trumponomics book that you can get right now tonight. We're going to try to keep Steve here so we can sign them for you. And thank you very much, Dan Proft, for being here, and thank you very much, Steve Moore, for being here as well. Have a good night, and we'll see you next time.